Tears welled in her eyes, tears of anger and hurt. So that's what you think of me? That I'm some senile old fool who can't tell the difference between a blessing and a scam? After everything I'm doing for you, this man, Mr. Abernathy, has been nothing but kind and respectful. He's helping me give you this gift. Why can't you just be grateful? Her words struck me like a physical blow. The accusation of ingratitude, the pain in her voice, it was more than I could bear. I backed down, mumbling an apology. The wall she had built around herself, expertly fortified by Mr. Abernathy, was too high for me to scale. I had failed, and in my failure, I had left her alone with the wolf. The final demand came 2 weeks before the wedding. It was for $25000. Abernathy's story was that the funds were coming from the foundation's Canadian headquarters, and to clear a sum that large across the border, a refundable international transfer bond was required. This, he promised, with a solemn tone, was the final step. Once this was paid, the $250,000, plus all her reimbursed fees, would be in her account within 48 hours, but by now, her savings account was drained. The nest egg she and my grandfather had built was gone. The money she'd so proudly given us for the initial deposits had been the beginning of the end. Panicked and in the grip of the sunk cost fallacy, the belief that she'd already invested so much she couldn't possibly stop now, she made a desperate decision. She went to the bank to apply for a home equity line of credit. She was going to borrow against the house my grandfather had built for her. This was the act that saved her from complete ruin. The bank manager, a kind woman named Mrs. Gable, who had known my grandmother for 20 years, saw the red flags immediately. An 82-year-old woman with no debt, on a fixed income, suddenly trying to borrow $25,000 with a story about a grant and an international bond. Mrs. Gable didn't just refuse the loan. She picked up the phone and called my mother, and my mother, her voice shaking with panic, called me. I left work in a daze, my boss's concerned questions fading into the background. I drove to my grandmother's house, a cold dread coiling in my gut. The house, usually so warm and inviting, felt silent and cold when I let myself in with my key. I found her in the living room, sitting in her armchair, staring at the telephone on the end table as if it were a venomous snake. Her face was ashen. The documents, the fake, glossy brochures and forged letters from the North American Grant Commission were spread on the coffee table. She didn't look up when I walked in. He was supposed to call an hour ago, she whispered. Her voice was a fragile, broken thing. The money was supposed to be in the account by now. I knelt in front of her, my hands on her knees. Grandma, I said softly. Mrs. Gable called Mom. We know. Please, tell me everything. And then, the dam broke. The pride, the secrecy, the manic excitement, it all crumbled away, leaving behind a devastation so profound it was terrifying to witness. She began to sob, not the gentle tears of an old woman, but the gut-wrenching, body-shaking sobs of someone whose world has been shattered. Through her tears, the whole sordid story came out. The initial call, Mr. Abernathy's smooth promises, the small payments that grew larger and larger, the secrecy, the lies. She confessed she'd even cashed out a small life insurance policy my grandfather had left her. In total, she had sent the scammers a faceless, soulless entity on the other end of a phone line over $40,000. Her entire life savings, he promised, she choked out, her hand clutching my arm with surprising strength. He was so nice. He called me Mrs. Vance. He asked about my roses. He said I was doing a wonderful thing for my family. He promised. While she was talking, the phone rang. We both flinched. The caller ID was unknown. I picked up the receiver, my hand shaking, and put it on speaker. Mrs. Vance? A familiar, smooth baritone asked. It was him, Mr. Abernathy. My grandmother stared at the phone, her eyes wide with a horrifying mixture of hope and terror. This is her granddaughter, I said, my voice cold as ice. We've been to the bank. We've filed a police report. We know who you are." There was a moment of silence. The charming, professional mask dropped. The voice that came back was flat, cold, and cruel. "You stupid old bee," he hissed. "You were so close." Then he hung up. The finality of it, the raw, unveiled cruelty in his voice, was the last blow. My grandmother let out a small, wounded sound and seemed to shrink into her chair, the light completely gone from her eyes. The dream was dead. The phantom fortune was gone, and all that was left was the crushing weight of shame and loss. The aftermath was a blur of grim practicalities. We filed reports with the local police, the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, and the FTC. They were all kind, professional, and brutally honest. The money was gone, transferred through a series of anonymous wire services and likely already converted to cryptocurrency. It was untraceable. The chances of recovery were virtually zero. Mr. Abernathy was a ghost, a professional who had likely done this to hundreds of other trusting seniors. The wedding was 2 weeks away. We had a venue and a caterer we could no longer afford to pay. The balance on. The joy had been sucked out of the entire process, replaced by a hollow ache. I felt a surge of anger so intense it scared me. Anger at the scammer, of course, but also a sick, guilty anger at my grandmother for her stubbornness, and at myself for not pushing harder, for not stopping it. We had a family meeting. My parents, Ben, and I sat in my grandmother's living room. She was quiet, wrapped in an afghan, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. "We have to cancel," I said, the words tasting like ash. "There's no way. We'll lose the deposits, but we can't go into debt for this." Ben squeezed my hand. My father nodded grimly. My mother was trying not to cry. Then my grandmother spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "No." We all looked at her. "You will not cancel your wedding because of my foolishness," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of its old strength. "That man, that thief, he took my money. He will not take this. He will not take this family's joy." And so we rallied. It was the most difficult, beautiful, and collaborative 2 weeks of my life. We called the venue and the caterer and explained the situation. They were, to our astonishment, incredibly compassionate. The barn venue owner, a woman whose own mother had been the victim of a similar scam, let us switch our Saturday booking to a less expensive Sunday and waived half the remaining fee. The caterer helped us rework the menu from a formal sit-down dinner to a more casual, but still delicious, buffet, slashing the cost. My friends organized a potluck dessert table. Ben's history club students volunteered to help with setup and cleanup. My mother and her sisters took over the flower arrangements, using buckets of blooms from their own gardens, including, most poignantly, dozens of my grandmother's perfect, fragrant roses. The string quartet was replaced by a playlist of our favorite songs on a rented sound system. The wedding day arrived, sunny and crisp. It was not the grand affair Eleanor had dreamed of giving us, but it was something far more precious. It was a testament to resilience. It was a community coming together. It was a mosaic of love and support, pieced together from the wreckage of the scam. My grandmother was there, dressed in a pale blue suit. She was fragile, but she was present. During the reception, I found her sitting by a window, watching the dancers. I sat down beside her. "It's beautiful, Clara," she said softly, her eyes misty. "It's not what I wanted for you, but it's beautiful. It's more than I ever could have wanted," I told her, and I meant it. "It's real. Everyone here, they're here because they love us. That's your real legacy, Grandma. Not money. This, the family you and Grandpa built." I took her hand, the one that used to feel so strong and now felt so delicate. "He didn't win. He took your money, but look at what you have. He can't touch this." A single tear traced a path down her wrinkled cheek, but for the first time in weeks, she smiled. A small, genuine smile. She had given up on baking our wedding cake, feeling too ashamed and frail. But that evening, she presented us with a small, perfectly baked apple pie, the one she was famous for. It was the most meaningful gift I have ever received. Our wedding story is not a fairy tale. It's a cautionary tale. It's a story about the insidious nature of evil and the vulnerability of those we love most. The financial wound is deep, and the emotional scar on my grandmother will likely never fully fade. She still flinches when the phone rings with an unknown number, but the scam, in its own terrible way, revealed a deeper truth. It stripped away the superficial trappings of a wedding and forced us to focus on what truly mattered: the vows of marriage and the unspoken, unbreakable vows of family. The thief tried to steal our joy, but in the end, all he did was show us exactly where it lived. We hope that by sharing these experiences, we can prevent another family from going through this kind of pain. Please let us know in the comments where you're watching from, so we know how far these stories are reaching. Thank you for listening. Of all the stories I could tell about my wedding, the one that truly defines it has nothing to do with the dress, the venue, or the vows. It's the story of a phantom fortune, a predator's smooth voice on the phone, and the quiet, devastating way my grandmother's love was turned into a weapon against her. This is the story of how a sophisticated elder scam didn't just steal her savings. It nearly stole the joy and trust from the most important celebration of my life. For more stories that shed light on the darkness of these crimes, please subscribe to the Elder Scam Stories channel. My grandmother, Eleanor Vance, was the matriarch of our family in every sense of the word. At 82, she was a bastion of stoic grace, a woman who had navigated widowhood, raised 3 children, and still baked the best apple pie in the state of Ohio. Her hands, though gnarled with arthritis, were rarely still. They were either sunk in the soil of her magnificent rose garden, kneading dough on a flowered countertop, or, most often, turning the pages of a well-worn novel. She lived in the same brick house she and my grandfather had built 50 years ago, a place that smelled perpetually of lavender and old books, a sanctuary of memories. When my fiancé Ben and I announced our engagement, Eleanor was a beacon of pure, unadulterated delight. Her eyes, the color of a summer sky, lit up with a brilliance I hadn't seen in years. "A wedding," she'd exclaimed, clapping her hands together. "Oh, Clara, my sweet girl, it's about time. We need a celebration." Ben and I were planning a modest affair. We were both just starting our careers, me as a graphic designer, him as a high school history teacher. We had a small savings account earmarked for a down payment on a house, and the wedding budget was, to put it mildly, tight. We were looking at a city hall ceremony and a backyard reception at my parents' house. It was practical, it was us, and we were happy with it. Eleanor, however, had grander visions. "Nonsense," she declared one Sunday afternoon over tea. "A wedding is a legacy. It's the start of your family's story. It should be beautiful, something you tell your own grandchildren about." She then leaned forward, her expression a mixture of pride and conspiracy. "Clara, my love, let me help. Your grandfather and I, we always planned for this. We set aside a little nest egg for our grandchildren's big moments. It would be my greatest honor to give you the wedding you truly deserve." I was hesitant. I knew she lived on a fixed income, her pension and Social Security. While comfortable, she wasn't wealthy. "Grandma, that's so sweet, but we can't let you do that. That money is for you, and what good is it doing sitting in a bank?" she countered, her chin set with that familiar, stubborn determination. "My joy comes from seeing my family happy. Please, let me do this. For me, how could I refuse?" The thought of having the wedding we secretly dreamed of, a beautiful barn venue, a string quartet, a photographer who could capture the magic, was intoxicating. After a long discussion with Ben, we gratefully, tearfully, accepted her offer. She wrote us a check for an amount that made my hands tremble, enough to cover the deposits on our dream venue and caterer. It felt like a fairy tale, and for a few blissful weeks it was. The shift was subtle at first. It began about a month after we'd booked the venue. I called her to gush about a dress I'd seen online, and her voice was different. Distracted. "Oh, that's lovely, dear," she said, but her usual enthusiasm was replaced by a kind of brittle energy. "Listen, I have to go, someone's on the other line." This happened a few more times. She seemed secretive, quick to end our calls. When I visited, I noticed stacks of official-looking envelopes on her mahogany desk, which she would quickly shuffle into a drawer if I came too close. When I asked what they were, she'd wave a dismissive hand. "Oh, just boring old business, dear. Nothing for you to worry your pretty head about." Ben was the first to voice a concrete concern. "Has your grandma seemed off to you lately?" he asked one evening as we were addressing save the dates. "She's just excited about the wedding," I said, a little defensively. "She's probably just busy managing her finances to help us." "It's more than that," he said, setting down his pen. "She mentioned something on the phone yesterday, something about clearing an international wire. When I asked about it, she got flustered and changed the subject. It just sounded strange. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach, but I pushed it down. My grandmother was sharp as a tack. She handled all her own bills, did her taxes, and could debate politics with more fire than anyone I knew. The idea that she could be in any kind of trouble seemed absurd. She was the rock, the unshakable foundation of our family." The first direct lie came a week later. She called me, her voice fizzing with an almost manic excitement. "Clara, darling, you won't believe the most wonderful news. I've been selected for a legacy grant." "A what?" I asked, confused. "A legacy grant for community building events. It's this wonderful philanthropic foundation. They found out I was helping fund a wedding, a major community and family building event, you see, and they've awarded me a grant of $250,000. The number hung in the air, so ludicrous it felt like a prank. 250,000. "Grandma, are you sure? That sounds too good to be true." "Oh, I know," she squealed, and I could picture her pacing her living room. "The man I spoke to, a Mr. Abernathy, he's so professional. From the North American Grant Commission, he said my long history of community involvement and my support for family values made me a prime candidate. The money is to be used for the wedding and to establish a family trust. Isn't it a miracle?" Every alarm bell in my head was now screaming. "Grandma," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Who is this Mr. Abernathy? Did you enter a contest? How did they get your information?" He said a third-party financial review board nominated me. "It's all very official, Clara. They've sent me documents and everything." Her voice took on a defensive edge. "Don't be a wet blanket. This is a blessing. Now we can really give you and Ben a wedding to remember, and you won't have to worry about a thing for years to come." The man on the other end of the line, the so-called Mr. Abernathy, was the architect of our nightmare. He was a master of his craft. He had, as we would later piece together, likely found my grandmother through a data breach or a purchased list of elderly homeowners. He had a low, reassuring baritone, used sophisticated financial jargon, and most importantly, he had identified my grandmother's deepest desire: to be a provider, to leave a lasting legacy of generosity. He didn't just target her bank account, he targeted her heart. The scam was a classic advance fee fraud, executed with chilling precision. To release the $250,000 grant, Mr. Abernathy explained, there were a series of mandatory fees. First, there was a $1,500 processing and registration fee. Eleanor paid it without a second thought, wiring the money from her savings. She told me it was just a bit of paperwork. A week later, Mr. Abernathy called with an unfortunate but necessary update. The grant money was being held up by federal tax regulations. To release it, she needed to prepay the taxes, a sum of $7,500. He assured her this amount would be fully reimbursed along with the grant money. "It's just a formality," she explained to me when I, now deeply suspicious, pressed her on it. "Clara, you have to spend money to make money. It's how these big financial things work." Mr. Abernathy has been so helpful, walking me through every step, The most insidious part of his strategy was the secrecy. Mr. Abernathy has strongly advised me not to discuss the details with anyone, she'd say, her lips pursed. It could jeopardize the grant process due to confidentiality clauses. Once the money is in my account, we can shout it from the rooftops. But until then, it's our little secret. He was isolating her, cutting her off from the voices of reason in her life, from me, from my parents, from Ben. He was creating a world where he was her only confidant, the sole holder of the keys to her dream. And she, so desperate to be the hero of my wedding story, went along with it. She wanted the grand reveal, the moment she could present us with this incredible gift, her face beaming with pride. The wedding planning continued, but now under a strange shadow. While I was tasting cake samples and picking out flower arrangements, I was also having hushed, worried conversations with Ben. She's withdrawn almost $10,000 into weeks, Clara, Ben said, his face pale. He had, with my reluctant permission, called our family friend who worked at Eleanor's bank. The teller is concerned, but your grandma told her it was for wedding expenses. They can't stop her from taking out her own money. I confronted her that weekend, my heart pounding. With a mixture of fear and guilt, I found her in the garden, tending her prize-winning roses. Grandma, we need to talk about this grant. It's not real. Her face, which had been soft with concentration, hardened instantly. She put down her trowel and stood up, wiping her hands on her apron. Clara, I will not have you question my judgment. I am not a child. I have handled my own affairs for 50 years, and I know a legitimate opportunity when I see one, but it's a scam. People lose their life savings this way. Please, just let me call the police or the bank's fraud department.